knows when you come out my way. That's why my field stays packed on Fridays. We hunting, fishing, good living, just soaking up every country second we're giving. Yeah, we a long way away from the highway, so go ahead, y'all, you can get sideways. Smoking, sipping, dip spitting, just soaking up every country second you're giving.
It's Justin Kelly and Laura Starling with the Old Boots Podcast, and our special guest today is Jessica Walden. Welcome.
Hello. Well, thanks for having me.
I am so glad that we're going to get a chance to talk to you because you know probably more about Macon music history than anybody in the universe.
Well, I get it honest. I come by it honest, I guess I should say. But yeah, I do have an encyclopedia to that wonderful music history that we hold in Macon, Georgia. And of course, I love talking about it and I love sharing it.
So let's go from the beginning.
Okay.
And where you were born, who you were born to.
Oh, my goodness.
How that all came about.
Yeah. Well, you know, I always joke with everybody that I was born after the song. Usually one of the first questions people ask me is they know there's some kind of family connection to the Allman Brothers, and they always are like, "Are you Jessica?" Like as in the song Jessica. And I was like, "No, I was actually born after the song."
After the song.
I was named after the song. That was Dickie Betts' daughter, Jessica. But I did have that familiar connection to the Allman Brothers. My Uncle Phil Walden was their manager. And of course, it was Capricorn Records was the house that the Allman Brothers built. And my uncle and my father got into this business really early on. In fact, pre-Allman Brothers with rhythm and blues and a once-in-a-lifetime human being named Otis Redding. And so that's where it goes back for me. But I was born in the late 70s, so you can imagine during that time, Southern rock definitely was having its moment and its heyday. And at the same time, that's also around the time of the new wave creeping into the scene and the 80s coming up. And so I didn't get to experience this incredible, legendary time that I heard so much about growing up. I did manage to make it as an infant to at least one Capricorn barbecue picnic and games, but I was on the hip of my mom and my dad. So, you know, I grew up very much in the shadows of this and in the shadows of Macon, Georgia, because once Capricorn closed, which happened about 1982, Macon kind of went back to sleep at that time. I mean, this is a time in which downtown had lost itself to the mall being built and retail changing. And you know, I just grew up in a very quiet Macon, Georgia, a place that you would have no idea was a place that, you know, a future president would stump at alongside a rock and roll band like the Allman Brothers, or an Andy Warhol and a Bette Midler would come here just to hear the music and feel our hospitality. And I would hear about all these things about Capricorn Records, but of course never really understood the ginormous impact that label made from our town as I do today. So grew up here, spent my whole life in Macon, Georgia. Actually, you know, we're recording here in Jones County. I spent many of my formative childhood years in Round Oak, Georgia, where my dad had a log cabin right next door to the Big O Ranch, the Otis Redding Ranch. And so spent a lot of time in this zip code, riding my pony, but also spent a lot of time in downtown Macon, where my dad still had a loft warehouse right next to the old Capricorn studio. And that downtown, again, very quiet downtown at the time. But it was a fun way to grow up because I was a little bit country and a whole lot of rock and roll. You know, I still got to go into the studio with my dad every now and then if there was a band recording next door. I still got to go to a lot of concerts growing up. But, you know, my first memory, you'd love this. My first memory ever, somebody said, "Jessica Walden, what is the first memory you have?" I was 3 years old. We were in New York City. I was told growing up that it was Madison Square Gardens. I've later heard it could possibly have been the Beacon. But either way, the Outlaws band was headlining, and that was my dad's band at the time. He was their manager and publisher. And we were at one of their big headlining shows, and the Hells Angels broke into backstage.
Oh, man.
And beat up the security. And I, along with my mother, and I'm sure other women and children, were evacuated from the venue.
Wow.
And I actually vividly remember part of that process of like getting us in the car and just kind of that sense of fear and panic that something was about to go down and leaving my dad behind. Luckily, Dad was fine. It's a funny story. There's a lot of legend to it. My dad's got a book called Southern Man, and it goes into more detail, but the Hells Angels were there because the Outlaws sang a song that referenced Angels Hide. And they thought, maybe is that about us? And then there's the name, the Outlaws, and there's a rival motorcycle gang named the Outlaw. So this is my beginning.
Wow.
This is how is understanding how these things all work together. So that was some of my first memories. So I did get to experience a lot of rock and roll growing up, and a lot of music that was still alive, post 70s. I was born in the late 70s. And of course, as we get into the 80s and we get into Macon trying to, still really hold on to its own sense of vibrancy. I mean, the things I remember most are cherry blossom street parties that you were involved in,
yes.
and going to those and seeing some of the acts there. And but yeah, growing up here in Macon, between Macon and Jones County, and then later going off to college, I ended up going into Atlanta at Georgia State University, and that was a great experience because by this point, my Uncle Phil had moved from Macon to Nashville post Capricorn. He got into the Nashville music scene. He had some real great success in Nashville, but it wasn't his thing. He was still just rock and roll at heart. Ended up making his way back to Georgia and relaunching Capricorn in Atlanta. And by this time, I'm a college kid. So for my college years, I actually got to work at Capricorn and work and see and witness Phil Walden in action. And it was just amazing. Not only him, but all my cousins who were in the business at the time. So, but that all eventually would lead me back here, back to home, which I very much am influenced by my father in saying it's one of the greatest places on earth to live and call home. And then all of that, and I become a Chamber of Commerce president. So that's where I am today.
Which is awesome because I can't think of anybody better for that job than you.
Oh, thank you. Well, people often say, like, wait a second, like this is a very, a Chamber of Commerce, this is not a new industry. The Chamber of Commerces have been around since Napoleon's time in Paris, France. This is a chief bureaucratic officer of business. How in the world do you get from your like hippie family to that? And I'm like, you know what? It fits perfectly because it's all about talent, attraction, and recruitment and retention. It is all about that. And that's what my uncle was in the business of in the 70s. With Capricorn, and it meant economic development for Macon, Georgia. And that's what I'm in the business of today, is that same spirit of we want you to choose here, live here, work here, invest here, and make a name for yourself. Make your mark in Macon.
Now, while you were in college, what were you majoring in?
I was majoring in journalism. With a heart of gold, intending to, go write for Rolling Stone or some kind of magazine. Right around the dawn of the internet and print media just completely getting obliterated as I was learning. And so luckily at Capricorn, they let me hang out with the publicity department and help out with the PR gurus there. And that got me on the PR track, which thank goodness that worked out perfectly because by the time I graduated, there was an opening for a position at the newly created Georgia Music Hall of Fame here in Macon.
Uh-huh.
And they were like, I remember I answered a classified ad in the Macon Telegraph. This is back when you could,
get a newspaper.
Actually have a newspaper with a job. And it said looking for a person who can write well and can help organize events and has a knowledge of Georgia music history. And it was like, here I go back home because it couldn't have been better written for me. So I got to come back home, work for the Music Hall of Fame, work under the great tutelage of one of my greatest mentors, Lisa Love, who still,
I love Lisa
don't we
Love.
love some Lisa Love?
Love Lisa Love.
Also getting to hang out with you more and work with you more and do some really fun things at the Georgia Music Hall of Fame. And that was so pivotal to me because not only did I really get to deep dive in Macon music history and start to understand just how huge of an impact we've had in this community to not just Georgia music, but like American music, how we completely helped define that all from the architect of rock and roll, but even further back to Charles Douglas and the jazz age. I mean, there's so much that comes from Macon, Georgia. But then I also did get to see the scope of Georgia music and just how it all plays together and how, everything from our Southern, from rhythm and blues to Southern rock to how it influences hip hop today. I mean, it was all just so connected that came out of the South and got to get into that, got to learn so much from that. And then also just got to get really passionate about Macon and about downtown and about the fact that we still had a song in us left. And that really opened the door for me just wanting to get engaged and involved and figure out how to do programming that brings people here and has a good time. And no better way to do that than music, as we know, to bring audiences together.
Music is definitely a universal language and
Amen.
something that pretty much everybody speaks.
Yes, there you go. There you go.
So you were working at the Georgia Music Hall of Fame, and what happened after that?
Well, at that point, the Georgia Music Hall of Fame and it can be debated all day long, but it was in a very precarious position because it was a state-funded agency. And, I was there, when I was at the Music Hall of Fame, I was there on so many just milestone moments, but also one of the craziest days of our lives was, 9/11, and we had a concert series going on and having to pivot from that and seeing what that did to tourism for a little while. And then eventually it would go under an agency change. So going from one state agency to another, and then just figuring out how it would be funded. And every time there was a new administration, how was it going to be funded? And, unfortunately, the Music Hall of Fame would eventually close. But I did, I worked there for about 5 years before I realized, I don't know if I want to bank my entire career on bureaucracy and the government. Here I am, a chamber president. But I also just still had that passion for telling stories and writing and, again, that Macon vibrancy piece. So I ended up getting a really awesome job with the 11th Hour, which at the time, not a lot of people may remember. I know Travis even mentioned it on one of the episodes. Travis Denning did because he played for the 11th Hour award show. But it was this incredible biweekly newspaper really focused on the arts and cultural scene of Macon that had a ragtag group of us running it.
I wouldn't call you guys a ragtag. I mean,
it was pretty awesome, though. Independent and just really trying to make something out of what we had, and I loved it. I was the editor there for several years, working for Brad and Megan Evans, and then at the same time, we also launched Georgia Music Magazine. Another Lisa Love moment. She was the editor in chief of that, and brought me onto that. So I did get back into journalism. I got back onto that side of it. But that really, that's to me was such a game changer in the community involvement piece of it. And going to live shows, seeing things start from the ground up like Bragg Jam that we just see is such a big entity today. Seeing these young and hungry artists like a very, very, very young Travis Denning. But, just see it. I mean, I just remember, golly, so many just beginning bands coming through Macon and getting their start, not really even playing for anybody, and now look where they are. And we were right there with them, reporting on it, for the 11th Hour, but also telling stories, telling great stories about this region and just how special it is. And I mean, it just has incredible history. So that was a good way to really stretch my legs in the storytelling piece of it all, and really embrace this community. And eventually, one thing always leads to another. And that's what I love so much about Macon. But I would keep going on the writing path of being able to where I worked for another magazine, actually several publications after that, right here in Macon, and then got into the community development side, working at Mercer University on the College Hill Corridor project, and that was a big defining moment for me and us as a community, because it was a 5-year, what started as just like this strategic plan to make our community more vibrant between Mercer University and downtown, that really just turned into like this entire movement of like really bringing Macon back to life. And it was such a cool opportunity. I was back in PR and communications at that point, but I was getting a program, Sunday concerts at Washington Park that brought people out, and I was getting to just really get creative with how we brand, how we tell our story, how we excite volunteers, how we can activate our neighborhoods. And in order to have a great downtown, you got to have strong neighborhoods around it, and that's what that program really focused on. And it was super cool because in the process, I found out, like, while working for this initiative, that at one point, Capricorn Records was so expansive. And my uncle, just again, the visionary that he was, had actually gotten into down payment assistance to buy historic homes in this area and renovate them. And all the Capricorn executives were doing that because he didn't want it to be in abandoned neighborhoods. He didn't want empty neighborhoods. He wanted single family housing in some of these. And so it's just cool to discover, like, man, my uncle was doing this on top of running a label, and they had merchandising and everything right there in the College Hill Corridor. So that got me really tapped into my roots. That also got me researching a little bit more about how do we tell Macon's story and how do we do it through our music history. And right around this time is when we got word that the Music Hall of Fame would definitely be closing, and that we had to close, like it was going to have to be closed by this certain date, that funding was up. And so I began piecing information together and trying to weave a narrative. I drove my dad around a lot and had him tell me addresses and stories that happened there. But by the time the Music Hall of Fame closed, the day after it closed, my husband Jamie and I launched Rock Candy Tours, which was a music history tour company. And we met in Washington Park, and 45 people came out and met us. And we walked them around that area and told stories about Macon's music history. And it became very evident that these stories still matter. And so from there, we had a business, and it was called Rock Candy Tours. Many people ask, like, where does that name come from? And it's funny because when you're forming an LLC, you're just trying to get the paperwork done, and it's just like, what do you want to call it? And I looked at my husband and I was like, well, this is kind of like, you're in the candy business. He's a 3rd-generation candy manufacturer. My family was in the rock and roll business, so why don't we just call it Rock Candy Tours? And he loved it. I
love it too. I'm so glad that I finally found out where the name came from.
Yep. And
because I got the rock part, but I didn't know about Jamie's family's candy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It all comes together.
Well, and if you ever hear Jamie give a tour, he'll tell everybody, he's like, that's because my wife is the rock of the business and I'm the sweet one. But it was really fun to just create something like that. And we did it we led tours for 13 years, giving tours to thousands of people from all over. And it was just so special because we drive by these places every day. We don't realize how much happened there. But our big mantra was, because of the Music Hall of Fame closing, that Macon's music history doesn't have to live within a museum's walls. It's on our sidewalks. It's on our street corners. And if these walls could talk, they would sing. Mm-hmm. And man, we got stories to tell. And so that's what we set about doing. And it really has been such a part of my journey. I can give you music trivia any day of the week when it comes to Macon, Georgia. I always tell everybody, I said, all roads lead back to Little Richard. Like, let me show you how. It's like, show me an artist day. We'll dissect it back. But, Macon just had, like, so much of who we are today is built on this very storied history and past that we were able to build from. Again, music being the universal language that did the impossible in a city of our size. I mean, it broke barriers. It brought audiences together. A poor, strange kid like Little Richard could make it out of Macon, Georgia in a segregated South and bust out of the recording booth with a song like Tutti Frutti. Anything is possible, you know? And to have an Otis Redding come from this same place, and then to follow that with an Allman Brothers, like there's something there. And so telling those stories, I'm really passionate about that's who we are and how we remind where it all comes from. We like to know where our food's from. Well, like, we also like to know where our music's from. And the music we play today, so much of it is deeply rooted in Macon, Georgia.
There's probably not a person that plays music that came from Macon, Georgia, who has not had the influence of either Little Richard or Otis or the Allman Brothers.
Yeah.
I mean, just like Travis Denning, we know he played some Allman Brothers when he was at Society Garden.
Yeah.
Any artist that comes and plays in Macon, whether they're from here or not, they're gonna jam some Allman Brothers.
Yeah,
right.
They sure
because that influence is there.
Yeah, I mean they were they laid the groundwork for so much of that and really changed the game. And it's so crazy. Like my dad and Phil were in the R&B business, and they started out in a partnership with Otis Redding. Again, like, let's go back in time. Like, this is the 1950s. This is the deeply segregated South. Like, white guys and a black artist are not working together. And if they do, it's just in a very, this was a true partnership. They were in business together. And through that, they were able to create this booking agency. They began to bring in other artists, other black artists, to play for white audiences. And next thing you know, I mean, many people don't know this, but the first number one hit that they had out of this agency that they built was Percy Sledge. And that hit was When a Man Loves a Woman.
Wow.
You know, that's your number one. That was your first song. And Percy Sledge was a hospital orderly in Opelika, Alabama. I mean, you know, and next thing you know, he's opening for Otis Redding at the Hollywood Bowl. Like, that is just so, like, and again, like here in Macon, was their agency. And so they were in this at one point, this company they built, which would eventually become Redwall Music Company, which stood for Redding and Walden, would become the largest black booking agency, second if only to Motown Records. And it was right there on Mulberry Street.
Isn't that something?
With WIBB.
And I did not know that.
Yeah, isn't that wild? And WIBB was right below them in the same building. So imagine they could go from the office to the airwaves,
to the radio,
right there. And you know, they built this thing. I mean, it wasn't just Otis and Percy. There was Sam and Dave. There was Arthur Conley. There was Joe Tex. There was at one point Etta James. I mean, it was the Sissy Houston, Ike and Tina Turner. All these artists were coming to be represented by them because not only were they, you know, able to open doors, but they were getting paid when they worked for this company because this partnership made sure that happened. So, you know, I think that part is just it's my favorite part of the story to tell. Like, I just feel like it's so groundbreaking, and it just really like showed it could be done. And they did the impossible. And then, of course, like all incredible stories, it had this horrible tragedy in it, which was the death of Otis at 26 years old, right on the peak of everything. Like, just laid down dock of the bay. Like, was still in the studio, hadn't even released it. He dies in a plane crash. And also think about this era. Now we're in 1967, late 60s. Times are just wild. This is a huge time of transition. You're losing Otis, you're losing Kennedy's, you're losing Dr. King. I mean, this is like a crazy time. And meanwhile, we're losing rhythm and blues. Like, it's transitioning. We're moving into disco. We're moving what eventually would become Southern rock. And for my dad and Phil, I mean, that was super hard. They lost their best friend. They lost their business partner. And now, like, there's a lot of, like, society's changing. Things are changing. And they got to figure out what they're going to do from here. And from there, eventually, Phil would find his way back in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, at the studio where he would hear this, like, he was actually there to hear Wilson Pickett record, and they were playing Hey Jude. And there's this long-haired, skinny hippie guy who can play incredible slide guitar. And he's like, who's that? And they're like, that's this guy, Dwayne Allman. And he tells Dwayne to put a band and move to Macon, Georgia. And so this is the part where I like to say that lightning doesn't tend to strike twice unless you're in Macon, Georgia. Because next thing you know, we've imported the Allman Brothers. And music is now transforming again. Right here from our own, from literally a front porch on College Street. Like, and it's just so wild to think about that. And my dad stuck with Phil through part of that transition, but then he would go on his own, not wanting to ride his big brother's coattails forever. He decides, well, I'm going to put a band together, start managing a band. And he ended up doing his auditions in the Florida region, where another scrappy long-haired singer was, playing. And no, lucky number 13 for my dad. He auditioned all these bands, and he says they were number 13. And that was this band whose name nobody could pronounce, nobody knew anything about, called Leonard Skinner. And so Dad now starts managing Leonard Skinner. So, that's the 70s right there, is you've got the Almonds and Skinner eventually meeting in the stadium to see who can outplay each other, because, like, sibling rivalry runs deep, but Southern Rock rivalry probably ran a lot deeper. And, Dad got to be the publisher on hits like Freebird and Sweet Home and Simple Man and Give Me Three Steps. Like, all those songs were part of his original catalog that he worked on. And then, just like with Otis, now we're into, deep in the music business, and more tragedy hits. And we lose Dwayne Allman to a motorcycle crash. We then lose Barry Oakley to a motorcycle crash. Dad is no longer the manager of Skinner when their plane went down, but he's now mourning the loss of Ronnie Van Zant in another plane crash. And I always tell everybody, I said, thank God Dad wasn't managing them at that time, because that was October 1978. Oh, I'm sorry, 78, I believe. And I would have been just over a year old. So, like, I would have, no doubt my dad would have been on that plane if that was the case. But, so that's why I say I'm after the song. Like, all that happened before I was even born.
But what a huge impact.
And I always joke that Freebird and Sweet Home put me through college, because he held on to that publishing for a little while. So that was good stuff. But yeah, so, I mean, the Allman Brothers, like, opened Macon to me the possibilities of, like, not just music, but the music industry. They were the ones who built, like, Capricorn Records, the Capricorn Studios, which is reopened today under Mercer's operation. That's the house that the Allmans built. Like, they really made that studio possible, and that attracted more artists to Macon, and they would record there. They would be booked there. They would play there. I mean, it was all about being in Macon during that time period, whether you're playing at Grant's Lounge or recording at the studio or being at the office on Cotton Avenue or checking out your scheduled dates at the Paragon Booking Agency on Walnut Street, or your music merchandise being made at Great Southern T-Shirt Company. Right here in Macon, or just eating at the H&H, where we all know that they like to go. But it was such a full service, like, economic development in a nutshell, like, that, you just can't help but want to repeat that today. So yeah, what they did before I was even born is pretty incredible. And then to watch Phil come back, I mean, with all the rock and roll, and everything that comes with it, it's kind of like there's this great Flannery O'Connor, she has a book, Everything That Rises Must Converge. Well, it converged in the 80s, and Capricorn went bankrupt, and so much of the family stuff was auctioned off. And I remember enough of that. And Phil moved to Nashville and laid low for a little while. But then this unknown country artist,
I know who this was. Do you know who it is?
I have no idea.
Can I say who it is?
Let's do it.
It was Kenny Chesney.
Really?
Yeah.
He was on the Capricorn label when I first met him.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy.
Oh my gosh. And, that's kind of another little known thing that people don't realize.
Yeah.
And again, I'm like, what was it with Phil Walden that he
Man.
could just spot him? Like he just knew a star when he saw one. And he loved them and he loved their music with all he had. In fact, he loved Kenny so much. And I've heard Kenny share the story that he let him go because he's like, you're so good. And I don't know country music. I don't know Nashville landscape. You need somebody else to help manage your career. And Kenny said that was pivotal for him.
Right.
He was on Capricorn the year of the flood of 94.
Right.
He was still on Capricorn.
Wow.
Well, or he had, when I first met him was like in 93.
It was early 90s.
Early
yeah.
90s.
Yeah.
And he was on the Capricorn label. And then we had the flood of 94, and we did a flood relief concert at the Georgia National Fairgrounds, and Trisha Yearwood came and did that concert for free. And I actually called Kenny, and he came down and opened that show. And it was like 6 months later that he got his B&A deal.
Wow.
So that must have been about the time
Yeah.
when
Super
your dad,
my uncle.
your
yeah.
uncle said, "Hey, I don't really know country that much, so there you
for
go."
it. Yeah. He, my cousin, who I look up to so much, Amantha, Phil's daughter, she was actually in Kenny's first video as his love interest.
Oh,
Oh, really?
It's a deep cut. You got to dig deep to find it, but it's so cute. And he came to Phil's funeral and just, paid his respects. Phil, again, just knew deep in his heart when these artists had that thing. And, but that was also around the same time he got into managing actors. He was managing Billy Bob Thornton, also an unknown screenplay writer at the time.
Wow.
And Jim Varney.
Now, I
Ernest.
also,
Ernest.
Oh, yeah.
little known fact that I do know that Billy Bob Thornton has the Allman Brothers mushroom as a tattoo.
He does. He sure does. And he has one of the necklaces too. And I just saw him not that long ago, and he was showing me all his almond. He's still the biggest Allman Brothers fan. And he's still a huge Phil Walden fan. It's really fun. Like, we've kept in touch over these years. But yeah, and then Ernest, Jim Varney, another great, can you imagine Billy Bob Thornton and Jim Varney together? I hear their stories. But Ernest was having his breakout, and Phil managed him, and Ernest ended up with Jim and his wife, Janie Varney. They were my godparents. So
Oh, really?
I got to spend some time in their home in Nashville. And it was really cool because I was like in 6th grade and he had a Saturday morning show and they filmed it at the house. I was like, my goddad's filming his Saturday morning TV show right now. And of course, Ernest goes to camp and saves Christmas and goes to jail.
Wow.
So that was a ton of fun. But the big band that really brought to me Capricorn back was Widespread Panic. And that was Phil's son Philip was in Athens, was a college student then, and he brought that band to his dad and was like, let's get back into the music industry. And Widespread, I mean, today continues to be one of the greatest touring bands there is out there. And that brought Capricorn back. They stayed with Capricorn all throughout the 90s. When I got to work at the label, they were still on it. And, that's just another good lesson. And like, when you got it, you got it. And for some reason, it was just a magnet towards this crazy family legacy.
Well, they definitely had it.
Yeah.
No doubt about that.
I thought I knew a lot, but man, you are just an encyclopedia with this stuff.
I know,
I
I
am
feel
so
like-
intrigued. I'm just shutting up over here.
I feel like that me and Justin need to get a private tour with you and Jamie.
Oh, man.
No, really.
How many
Yeah.
hours you got? It'd be fun. And they're doing such a good job at Visit Macon to make sure that we can continue to stay in that. So last year we sold Rock Candy Tours to Visit Macon. So now it's still called Rock Candy Tours, powered by Visit Macon. And it allows you to book music history tours based off of all of our research and writing and they do the van tours, which was something we weren't able to offer regularly before. And it's been so great because for Jamie and I, it was such a love letter to the community. I mean, we were not making a ton of money at this. Otherwise, we would have quit our day jobs. But,
right.
But it was so important to us. And I brought a lot of the family history, but Jamie really did get into the research. Like I would be at the house. I'd be like, where are you? and he'd be deep into the library at Washington Memorial Library, researching like literally phone books of addresses. Like he can tell you where every one of James Brown's addresses were when he lived in Macon.
Wow.
Like we're full of trivia. But what we've discovered so much on this is, yes, there are the greats like Little Richard, Otis Redding, James Brown for the time he lived in Macon, Allman Brothers, Capricorn. But then there's like these unsung heroes. Like there was this jazz singer named Lucille Hegeman who basically was one of the first big recording artists for the 1920s and released Hard Hearted Hannah, which is, a legendary Georgia song. It's a jazz song, but she's from Macon, Georgia.
I did not know that.
She went on to Chicago to pursue her blues career. And so you've got that. You've got, the yodel that comes from Macon that Merle Haggard was so into, was an artist who was born in Macon. Like when Merle Haggard came to Macon and ended up with that unfortunate hospital stay. Like,
yes, I remember.
He was all about finding out like more about the roots of this artist who was from Macon, who unfortunately, with these older pieces of history had some unfortunate moments in it. And but then you've got Reverend Pearlie Brown, who was like a street singer. And you think about in every urban area, especially a downtown, you're going to have your local person who begs for money and sings songs and may seem a little out there. Well, Reverend Pearlie Brown, he's blind. He was preaching. He was proclaiming the Lord and singing music and using a medicine bottle for his slide guitar. And he would be a huge influence on Dwayne Allman, who had just arrived in Macon. Later, Reverend Pearlie Brown would end up marching with Dr. King at the front of the lines and be one of the first black men to perform at the Ryman.
Wow.
At the Grand Ole Opry, I should say. Grand Ole Opry, back when it was where it was, but at the Ryman. When Lucinda Williams played here, now over a decade ago, because I remember I was super pregnant, she said she grew up here. She spent her first 6 years here in Macon.
I had no idea about
Williams,
that.
like one of my favorite artists. And her father, poet Miller Williams, was a professor at Georgia College right up the road from here. And she said, my formative years were spent on these streets in Macon listening to Reverend Pearlie Brown as he sang on the street corner. Like, how cool is that?
That's very cool.
So again, like there's so much to it. It goes so deep. I mean, the stories just run so deep outside of our greats, because behind these greats are more and more stories and more layers to everything that created this blueprint for American music right here in Macon, Georgia.
I think you need to do a TV show.
Yes.
like a TV special. I mean, really, about Macon music.
Yeah. There needs to be more of it. We need to tell our story more.
Netflix needs to call you.
There you go.
Yes.
There you go. Well, there's been a lot of attempts at that, like in the sense that we'll start a project. There was one network who was really into like doing kind of its own drama series about all those crazy wild years. And, I watch these projects come and go, and I would love to see. Of course, we had the beautiful documentary that Georgia Public Broadcasting did not that long ago on Macon music, funded locally by the Peyton Anderson Foundation here in Macon. And that one did a great job, but there's just so much more to tell. Like, it's just so extensive. And I tell everybody, it is the things that movies are made of, but the movie hasn't been made yet because it's so crazy. But
and any movie that is made by about somebody, like even the Little Richard, you touched on it a little bit, but
yeah.
All those guys in that movie that you're talking about, the people that were coming up and rising stars along with Little Richard, they were wondering, how in the world do you got your song on the radio? None of ours are on the radio. And he even says in the movie, well, son, you got to go on down there to WIBB and pay that man, and he'll put it on the radio.
Here's a fun one about James Brown came to Macon. Augusta claims him, but really he made it in Macon. That's what I tell everybody. In fact, he played not far from where we're sitting right now, and actually was involved with a shootout at a local club with Joe Tex.
Was that Andrews down there? Andrews Bar?
I think it's Club something at the time.
Okay.
I don't know if it necessarily exists. It was a cinder block building.
Yes.
Not Adams Lounge.
Adams Lounge.
Not
that's
Adams
right.
Lounge.
Okay.
There was another one, Club 50 something, 50. Anyway, so that's where Jamie's very handy.
That was at the corner of Highway 18 right there by
I think
Ranchers.
You're right.
I think that is exactly where
That's where that was.
So And that's where, again, Jamie's perfect because he's far more accurate with the numbers than I am.
Right.
But I love the stories. And my favorite James Brown story is when he came to Macon, he originally came with Bobby Bird and the Famous Flames. They were the gospel starlighters. He was seeking redemption. He'd already, as a teenager, spent time in a hard labor camp for, criminal teens back in the day in Toccoa, Georgia, was essentially banished from Augusta and just really all of, what would that be, Northeast Georgia, comes to Macon, seeking salvation and in a gospel group, essentially. But he also was chasing Little Richard. Like, he knew, again, if Little Richard could make it, maybe I have a shot too. And so he was at a local club where Little Richard was performing that night. And James approached Richard and said who he was and what he wanted to do. And Richard wrote 3 words on a napkin and handed it to James Brown. And those 3 words were, please, please, please. Like, I don't know the context. I don't know what that means. But James Brown ran with that napkin up Mulberry Street to WIBB studio and basically in one take recorded, please, 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 which ended up being his big first hit.
Wow.
That is something.
Yeah.
I could sit here for 5-6 hours.
I know. I think maybe we need to find some kind of funding for you to do like a 10-episode docuseries.
Docu-series, yes.
Yeah.
Man.
And you're the
people would
perfect
love
person
this.
for it.
Yes.
I mean,
Just find somebody really, we need that, that magical billionaire to ride in to be able to secure the rights to all this music for that thing, because it's nothing without the music. And it's just so funny to me that's where like Muscle Shoals documentary. I don't know, have you seen that?
I need to watch that.
Oh, it's so great.
I've heard about it.
You got it. Like, it's on Amazon. And they give a great homage to Macon at one point, talking about my dad and Skinnerd. But it's the most fabulous music documentary, and everybody wants one just like that made about Macon with our own story to tell. Because Muscle Shoals was our sister city, in music. But even the guy who produced that told me personally, and I think he is a legacy of a very broad, philanthropic, like, huge corporation. So in other words, he had the money and he is like, I don't know if I could ever do that again, because that music is so hard to secure and you can't tell the story without the music.
Right.
And so it's hard. Maybe things are changing in that, but I think that's really been the only thing that's ever held us back from finally like having that real big full length feature documentary but we need it. And I'm not giving up hope on that.
Well, I hope you don't, because
Me too.
I would love to see that happen. And I would certainly love to see you and Jamie be the host of that.
Yes.
Well, we have fun with it. We've had fun with it to watch people just like y'all are doing right now. Like, man, I had no idea. Like, I've lived here my whole life. I mean, veteran in the music business. It's like it's so fun to watch people's face light up with just that knowledge. And I mean, when we started our business in 2011, for that first 2 years, we mainly only had like out-of-town tourists and really European tourists, like Germans was a big part of it. And they would often like stay at like the 1842 Inn and think everything was walkable, and they realized like the big house is like way down the road. But we kept saying we have all these, European tourists who knew so much about our history, and they almost knew more than most of us who had lived here our whole life, because it's just been here for us. But like, it's a big deal across the world what Macon, Georgia means to music.
Right.
And so they would come here and they'd know everything and they'd want to hit all the spots. And, but we have such an inventory of places and landmarks. I mean, from Rose Hill Cemetery to H&H to the office on Mulberry to the Grand Opera House, the Douglas Theater, Capricorn Studios, our, the big house, like, it really is amazing the landscape we have. And one of my favorite moments in all of this was, and I wouldn't say it was a favorite because it was actually really stressful at the time, but I was given a tour on Cotton Avenue. And if you walk Cotton Avenue, like every 3 steps, I can drop some knowledge on Macon music history from Little Richard to Otis Redding up to the 70s in Capricorn, because that's where Capricorn's original office was located. But it was also Prior to that, Redwall Music's location, the Otis Redding International Headquarter fan club was there. There was a hotel there that Little Richard would stay in. I mean, it was just like Cotton Avenue is just full of history. And then one day I was giving a tour, and we were at the Cotton Avenue Capricorn location. And as I turned around to talk about the building, I noticed there's like this pink slip on the door. And I was like, what is that? I don't understand why there's a notice on the door. Well, as soon as the crowd started walking in the direction, I got it to read later. And when I looked at it, it was a demolition notice. It was like, we're going to tear the building down. Because that building had essentially sat empty since 1982 when they padlocked it at the foreclosure. And it had been owned, it just went through ownership, a lot of out-of-town ownership, but it went through ownerships. And here it was kind of at the end of the line. It was a hazard to downtown. The roof was collapsing. It was considered inhabitable, all the things. And this was like the notification period to let you know it was going to be demoed. And so I ended up writing a note, I had a column at the time in the Macon Telegraph and wrote about it. And a lot of people had taken the tour by then, and they started making calls. And sure enough, that building ended up not getting torn down. Thank goodness. It still doesn't have a purpose and a job just yet, but a local developer, Brian Nichols, who is also the man who's responsible for bringing the Christmas lights to Poplar Street. I mean, just believes in this community more than anyone. He bought the building and said, I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet, but y'all have made it clear that this place matters, and we're going to figure this out, and we're going to get it up to a place where it's no longer a hazard to the community, and like maybe we can figure it out. And when I gave the tours, I always would point to the upstairs office because there was a Mountain Dew can in the window that had been there probably since 1981, 82. And it was like the old labeling, and I'd always say, this shows you how old this building's been abandoned. Well, when Brian bought the building, he came by my house and he's like, I got something for you. And he handed me that Mountain
Dew.
And it's in my office today at the chamber. And he's managed to restore part of it, which is the Macon Rocks rock climbing place, which is kind of cute next to Capricorn Records. But when they got into the actual Capricorn proper part of the building and they lifted the roof off of where it had started falling in, they basically unearthed the entire Capricorn publicity department. Like all the papers were still there. Photos. I mean, some things were damaged beyond repair, but other things were actually in really good shape. And Brian has just worked tirelessly to get those things properly archived with Mercer or even with the proper person. Like he found Bonnie Bramlett's birth certificate. We made sure it got back to Bonnie.
That's something right there.
But that what it showed me again though was just by us being able to share that story, like that place is not going to be just dust in the wind. And we watched during our time of Rock Candy being, its own little entity. That's when we saw the restoration of the Capricorn studio, and that was super special, which Mercer spearheaded that, but that was also led by another private developer, Jim Dawes, who donated it back to Mercer, and Mercer decided to make the most of it because they knew this place mattered. And for me, it's huge even today because the building is essentially one side was my dad's and one side was my uncle's, and now the building's all together in one building. But I lived on my dad's side, which I call the 548 side. And I lived in there when I stayed with my dad. That's where we lived and when we weren't here in Round Oak. And so that place has been fully restored. So it's like walking in your house that's been completely renovated. And I joke that it still smells the same, like, whiskey, cigarettes, and shag carpet. Like, it still has that great smell. But it was really cute there because I drew on the walls when I was I think I was 7, probably maybe even a little bit younger. But I drew on the walls because my dad let me, and it was an old warehouse. And so I had this very extensive mural of my own of like unicorns and animals. And when they renovated that, they left it, and they drew like a little thing around, so you can still see my artwork. So that was fun, that it's an awesome, incredible facility, like still state of the art, just like Capricorn was built back in the day. Can do the analog, can do the digital. still has that incredible sound that was just so distinctive for Southern rock at the time. It also has a music incubator component so that bands of tomorrow can rent a space in the incubator and not have to play in their parents' garage or wherever else, but be in the space. And it has a museum to Capricorn, and they do some really great special events and programming. So I feel like we're starting to live the dream, of being this city that's like inspiring new artists today because of this incredible past that we have.
Do you play an instrument?
I do not. I do not. Not one person in this family of mine
can play an
instrument or carry a tune. Like, it's insane to me that we're that, but we must have a really good ear.
You got a good ear.
That's all I can hope.
That's all that matters.
But yeah, my son is 10 and he's gotten really into musical theater and is starting to learn vocals, and I hope he picks up an instrument. I really do. I'm trying not to pressure him. At the same time, I'm like, oh God, please don't pick up a guitar. We talked about this earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Like trying to deter him completely from this idea of the business. But I do see that he's got a little bit of a flair for it.
I think that the music is born in people.
I do too.
I really do.
Yeah.
I know.
I do too.
Like my dad, he loved music. He loved it so much. And he bought a guitar and he bought a banjo but he couldn't play anything except for the spoons. He was really good on the spoons.
Maybe I need to give the spoons a try. It is. Music
but I mean,
is born in that. Our creativity,
And I think that those people like the Allman Brothers and Travis Denning and people that we talk to who maybe have a listen or two and then they're that's just born in them.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
You can't, I don't know.
You can't, yeah. No.
You either have it or you don't, and you can't teach or learn it.
You can never, like, a legend like Dwayne Allman wasn't learned.
No.
He was a 1 in a million.
Right.
Just designed to do that.
Yeah.
I really, and Otis Redding, same thing. Like, I mean, and that's the thing, like when you're born with that kind of talent, you're so driven with it. Like it's just unstoppable for sure. So none of us have ever been behind the mic directly except for, to run our mouths. And
all right. Well, here's a couple of little bits of trivia that you can add to your
okay.
If you don't know them.
Okay.
Because you pretty much know everything.
No. Always learning.
Did you know that John Baker once played bass for Percy?
No. Well, yes, I did.
I thought I was going to
me that. Yeah. I do know that, and that's a good one though. That's a deep cut right there.
And that's the jeweler, right? John Baker, the jeweler.
Yes,
okay,
jeweler
gotcha.
to the Macon Stars.
Yeah,
actually, he told me that.
And also, the Kentucky Headhunters, Ricky Lee and Doug, snuck into Rose Hill Cemetery. About 2:00 one morning after playing in Macon because they had to go to Dwayne's grave. I mean, they just had to, and so I know they snuck in there. I know they weren't supposed to, but
I guarantee they weren't the only ones who snuck in.
Oh, there's a lot of people who have snuck in there, but
we can claim that one. That's great.
But it's funny how back in the 90s and all, when people would come to town to do a show. That was one of the main destinations.
Was Rose Hill?
Was to go to Rose Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I know Leroy Parnell did that, and Doug and Ricky Lee did it, and I don't know who all, but...
Well, it's still, did you know that it's still our number one destination today?
Really?
And that we know it now because we can do all those crazy things digitally, like geofence it and get numbers. And one of our biggest sites, of course, what we hope to be America's next national park at Old Mulgee Mound. That, of course, has extremely, like, it's Rose Hill and Old Mulgee. Like, that's where we're seeing the numbers. And so, to me, like, I mean, it's our Jim Morrison site, like to Paris. Like, it is still such a visited spot and really such a beautiful place to visit.
It is.
And take care of and preserve. I think that's what's so important. Like, we're going to be one of the few sites in America that will eventually, and I don't even like thinking about it because I don't want to see any more of them go, but one of the few sites in America that has almost an entire band interred in the same place. Like,
wow.
Isn't that crazy? All roads lead back to Macon.
Well, Miss Jessica, I know you said you had to be back at a certain time, and it's about that certain time.
Thank you.
But I'm pre-asking, can we do part 2 of this and maybe go downtown with some cameras and go do a little snippet, maybe a little 30, 45-minute tour and show it to some people. Show it to our viewers,
How long did a Rock Candy tour last?
It depends. It depends on the route and depends on if your car and that sort of thing. So we had a 2.5-hour tour, and then we had what we call the Rock and Roll Stroll, which and they still do this at Grant's Lounge, and it's about an hour, like walking around downtown.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I work, the Chamber of Commerce is located on Poplar Street, right around the corner from Capricorn.
Mm-hmm.
So literally, if I stand on my street corner at Poplar and MLK, I'm standing between Capricorn, what was the Trailways bus station, then Ann's TikTok, and the Douglas Theater. I'm actually standing on what was referred to as the Black Broadway of the South. And I mean, just like Cotton Avenue, you cannot take a step without referencing some element of Macon music there.
We might.
I would love to do it.
we might. If you can get that 30-minute tour for me and Justin, or that hour tour, we might can get you some free Dairy Queen.
We'll work for Dairy Queen.
I know a guy.
Yeah, I know a guy. He knows a guy.
That's great. Best Dairy Queen in America.
Yes,
Here.
absolutely. Well,
Thank you for coming to talk to us.
Thank you. I feel like I'm sitting with my own music legend right here. So I appreciate y'all, and thank y'all for telling stories, because that really is what it's all about, sharing these stories of where it all began and where it can go from here.
Absolutely. Well, we're looking forward to part 2 of this podcast. Hopefully, we can maybe take a little downtown tour and take you guys along with us, because wasn't that amazing? And like always, want to remind you, if you can do something good, you should do something good. We'll see you on the next episode. That's it.
That was awesome.
Oh my
Thanks,
God.
y'all.
Thank you so much.
That was all. I mean,
it